Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I hope this finds you and your families healthy and well as possible in our upside down world. And I'm Harry Haney, and I lead the Supply Chain Center here at Loyola University Chicago, where we bring together the business and academic community to address supply chain challenges responsibly and sustainably. We do that in multiple ways, including events like this and by bringing companies and students together to work on projects, amongst other things. Just a couple of points about today's event. Please introduce yourself on the chat function. We'd like to know who's out there. And we are recording the session, and we will send a link to it afterward to all the registrants. Our format today has actually changed a little bit since we first envisioned it. The good news is there won't be any PowerPoint. And based on a tremendous number of questions, great questions that came in with the registration, we've decided to call a bit of an audible here and put the questions into several buckets and selected some good ones that we think we'll try to address. You're welcome to submit questions live via the chat, and we'll work through those. Hello,
Yeah, Harry, I muted. You're open now.
Okay. How much of that was, because I was.
Just the last 2 seconds.
Just the last 2 seconds? Okay, got it. We've got a distinguished panel here today, folks, and I'd like to introduce them real quick. With expertise spanning critical considerations across a wide range of areas as we work through the implications of the pandemic. First off, Kyle Baltus, who is a real estate partner at the law firm of Jones & Day. Deborah Moritz, who is Executive Managing Director at Cushman & Wakefield. Efrat Schulman, who is a labor and employment partner at Jones Day, and Dr. David Shoham. A late addition, based on some of the questions. Dr. Shoham is an epidemiologist, and he's also director of the public health programs here at Loyola University Chicago. And finally, last but certainly not least, Dr. Rebecca Silton, who is associate professor of clinical psychology here at Loyola. So with that, why don't we get started? Let's start off right away with the mask question. And then the questions are, can we make masks mandatory? And what if employees refuse or passively just won't wear them? What are employers' options with regards to this? And what can we do as coworkers if our coworkers aren't doing that? And Efrat, I'd like to start, if you'd like to start with that would be great.
I think we need.
I'm not hearing Efrat.
Want to just read my lips? Okay, sorry about that. So the answer is yes, employers can require employees to wear a face mask. And if an employee is required to wear a face mask and refuses, the first step is figuring out whether the employee has a medical reason or a disability for that refusal. If there is a medical condition that can be exacerbated by wearing the face mask, then the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, requires that the employer make reasonable accommodations for that employee, which could mean a whole host of things. For example, is it possible for the employee to do her job without any close contact? An employer should keep in mind also that there may be religious objections to wearing a mask, which also might need to be accommodated. And in addition, in the chance that a mask itself creates a workplace hazard, the employee might be able to refuse under OSHA guidelines related to hazards related to PPE. If the employee does not have any medical or religious condition that could be exacerbated by use of the face mask, then the employer may require the employee to take leave without pay. You know, that's as far as the employer and employee obligations and abilities to make certain decisions based on the right to refuse or the desire to refuse. I don't know if anyone else has anything more in terms of the methods that we may go about encouraging uses of face masks.
Yeah, thanks for that explanation. I think one of the issues that we've seen, with particularly with clients that have public-facing businesses, where consumers are coming in, the ability to require face masks in that context, distinct from the employer-employee relationship. And and this has actually been a significant story in the news. Is a lot of large chains are now requiring face masks, for entry. And under Title III of the ADA, orders and requirements like that are permitted, as long as the business provides a reasonable accommodation. So in the context of a grocery store chain, as long as the customers are being provided the opportunity for curbside pickup or home delivery, sort of rounding out the discussion on the can you require the face mask even in the public accommodation context. And so we're talking about restaurants and hotels and retail stores. You can do that as long as you provide that reasonable accommodation.
Yeah, one other thing I would offer is you asked how about mandatory. So we tend to think about the legal perspective. In my business, commercial real estate, where we're advising large corporations on how to return to work at this point in time, I do think that there's an education component that's really been missing. So keep in mind change management principles. What really is required to bring people along for the ride, to understand the ramifications, not in a threatening way, but in an informative, educational way. And as we advise building owners and managers, we really encourage them to approach it with a healthcare concierge mindset, as opposed to a go, no-go mindset. Really, again, making people believe that you genuinely believe and support their health, wellness, and healthcare.
And I'll add on really quickly onto that from a wellness perspective. One thing with that the initial data are showing is that people who are high in trait empathy, who are high in empathy and concern for others, tend to be wearing their masks. And so one thing that organizations can start to do is to start to develop and promote a culture of empathy within your organization. And empathy, it's not a fixed trait. It's something that can be cultivated. It can be cultivated at the level of community, the level of organizations, through messaging that can help establish empathy as a normative cultural value. And this can also be accomplished through actions, pro-social actions of empathy and kindness as well. So a little empathy is going a long way right now in helping people wear their masks out of concern for others and also, of course, themselves.
Okay. Any other perspectives on that from any of our panelists? I'm seeing some comments in the chat section, and that's great. I would encourage you to do that, and we'll go through those at the end as well. And if you have resources or information in there that you want to share with the group, then we can include that in the material that goes back out. Okay.
I'll just reemphasize something that Dr. Silton said. The issue with masks is not about protecting yourself. It's about protecting others. And I think it's very important to keep reminding people of that you are being protected by others wearing their masks and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's a
with
great.
With the exception of the N95 masks, respirators, they're not meant to protect the person wearing them.
Okay.
And there's some powerful visualizations that can help provide that psychoeducation with very few words. And I think probably a lot of people have already seen those images. I can share some links to images that would work really well in really kind of just providing that visualization.
Great. All right. So, the biggest anxiety may not be the work environment itself, but rather how the heck do I get there? If we ride public transportation, how safe is it? So the question is, what are employers doing to try to secure a safe commute to work? And what should we tell employees that are not comfortable taking public transportation? And what do you do if you have to take public transportation? So there's a lot in there, but let's talk about transit for a couple minutes. David, would you want to start with the with the public health? How do
Sure.
we protect ourselves standpoint?
Sure. So we've all heard this notion that we need to be 6 feet apart from each other to maintain social distancing, and this advice could change in the future. There's a big debate going on right now within the scientific community about what the role is of aerosolized or airborne transmission. And what that refers to are small, less than 5 micron particles of, they could be dust, they could be small water particles that the virus has attached to. And that can stay in the air for hours. And we've seen some conditions such as measles where it stays in the air for days and can be transmitted very easily. The epidemiology doesn't support large-scale airborne transmission. We would be seeing much higher R numbers. That's the reproductive number, the number of new cases that arise from each case of COVID. The R that we're seeing now is 2, which is consistent with seasonal flu and other conditions that are spread primarily through droplets and through contact with surfaces. The idea of 6 feet, though, is that if you speak, whenever you speak, there are droplets that are emanate from your mouth when you're breathing. Same thing. We've seen cases where choir singers acquired COVID from their choir partners. The idea is that after 6 feet, it falls to the ground and it's no longer a significant risk. Now, just think about anyone who's ridden the L or ridden on a CTA bus, particularly during rush hour. And we're seeing that rush hour is now the middle of the day, not the typical hours of early and late. And it's much less crowded because so many people are working at home. The 6 feet of distance, though, is very difficult to maintain. And the CTA has provided a maximum number of riders of 15 on their standard buses and 22 on the articulated buses and L trains. There's still, significant risk of being within 6 feet of other individuals. That's potentially the most hazardous part of the workday, is getting to and from work if you're taking public transit. As a public health person, I've been a proponent of public transit for all of my career. This is one instance, though, where maybe there's a little bit of caution about, taking public transit to and from work.
Thanks, Doctor. Any other thoughts about this one, folks?
I'll just put from another perspective, the idea that sometimes bad decisions are made for good reasons. I think that employers need to be very wary of how they factor in public transportation in terms of planning on who returns to the physical workspace, to the office, and just to make sure that this idea of making sure that people who rely on public transportation are not in the groups of people who are brought back doesn't end up, you know, unintentionally having disparate impact on certain protected classes that we don't want to negatively impact.
Yes, and in my work, we have the privilege of working with hundreds of clients and through this process. And it's really interesting. I think almost to a client in the United States, employers are really focused on choice, if and when possible. Obviously, for those who are dependent upon public transportation, for all of the clients that we serve, either they're getting subsidies to take alternative modes, i.e. drive, which yes, in most markets does in fact cost more money. So companies are subsidizing that effort, whether it's the cost of gas or whether it's the cost of parking. In addition to that, they're being thoughtful about modifying the hours, which was mentioned a little bit earlier. So I do think that almost to a company, they're very focused on not pushing the limits, yes, caring about their employees and recognizing that it's in everybody's best interest, the employer and the employee's best interest, to really only push if and when absolutely essential.
Really good perspective. For large swaths of the economy, the pandemic has shown that remote work is more feasible than probably many of us expected, at least in the short run. So how is this being managed in leases and the impact on the economy? And what are tenants looking to reduce their square footage? Or do we in fact need more of it because of the density, the new density requirements? Do we think there's going to be a permanent reset in the amount of space that's going to be required? Kyle, would you want to start with this one?
Sure. So I think, right now the clients that we're working with, this is a difficult balancing act, right? Because I think on the one hand, I think by large measure, the feedback that I've heard is the working from home is going, well, for office-based employers, just again, making a generalization. So I think there's certainly some pressure or some thought to reducing space in that regard. And that's sort of balanced by how quickly do we think that the public health issues that we're dealing with will resolve themselves? Because if I'm a tenant and I'm signing up a 10-year or a 15-year lease or a 10-year lease with a 5-year option, well, it's certainly relevant what's going to be happening, 1, 2, 3 years down the road. I have to be concerned about, at the end of my 10-year lease term, do I, as an employer, as a tenant, put myself in a difficult position if I don't have sufficient space to provide to my employees, or the type of office space that my employees will expect, against my competitors. So our clients are very much working through that, and I'm sure Deborah has had the same experience, like as we speak, to try and balance what will that look like.
Right. It's interesting, before COVID, if you looked at the United States population, the working population, about 5% of people actually worked from home. Obviously, that will in fact increase. And the number one reason why it wasn't higher was manager resistance. So now managers have been thrown into the deep end. Many managers are now enlightened. So for sure, I prefer not to say work from home will increase, but work how you work best will increase. So being enlightened as an employer is really very important. The one thing that we strongly encourage people to think about, though, is already we've seen a diminishment in company culture. Our firm does a survey called Experience Per Square Foot. It is literally intended to keep your fingers on the pulse of the people. We had it as a model pre-COVID. We have it as a XSF at home model now that COVID has hit. And of all the companies that participated, only one saw their culture improve. They saw it improve because senior leadership was really ramping up their communication. So I encourage people to be incredibly thoughtful about who ultimately they allow to work, how they work best, how they support work from home people. And keep in mind that this, although seems new to a lot of us, it wasn't all that long ago that companies like Yahoo and Best Buy did big experiments themselves, and they didn't really have incredibly positive output for the company's benefit.
Yeah, and Harry, just one other piece
Sure.
I'll add to this. We talk about the economy and the response of tenants to these issues, and I think that the reality is, it's been a challenging time for a lot of tenants, both not just in the office, commercial office sector, but also the retail sector, and I think one of the biggest questions that we've been getting in this area is, particularly during times where businesses are faced with capacity limitations, they can't use their space how they previously used it, during the shutdown as well. Do I have to pay my rent? And there's lots of litigation that's been sparked by these questions, and I think it'd be a disservice to the topic not to address it just at least at a high level. There are cases in Illinois. There's a case involving a large law firm in the city that's pending. I think the bottom line is for tenants who find themselves in a situation where they wonder, do I have to pay my rent? I think it really boils down to what does your lease say? I think it will be probably, unfortunately, years until the courts weigh in on a lot of the language. But I think if you find yourself in that situation, I think keep an open dialogue with your landlord, read your lease closely, and I would say exhaust the resources that you have at your disposal, whether that's the Paycheck Protection Program or some other means to satisfy your obligation.
Mm-hmm.
So Kyle, you just said three incredibly interesting things. Number one, you mentioned retail. I think retail was in for a rude awakening even before COVID hit. In the United States, we have 24 square feet of retail space per person. Compare and contrast to Europe or Asia, which is closer to 8 square feet. So we were already incredibly over retailed. So we were set for an adjustment. So that's just a reality. Retail's been hit hard, as everybody knows. You also talked about the rent payment, and as we're advising our clients, yes, this is a great time to renegotiate. The world has been turned on its head. So we encourage conversations, but remember that ultimately you have to live with a landlord. So it needs to be a partnership. So I love my lawyers, but ideally you want to kind of keep it out of the litigious side of the equation, just good negotiations and partnership with your lawyers. And then also I wanted to mention the landlord perspective. Again, they've been thrown into the deep end. Landlords, depending on their financial wherewithal, will be either more open to discussions and or incredibly concerned. But this, again, is the time to really partner and co-develop solutions that really help both of you succeed, which is really the ultimate outcome for the economy.
Yep. Sounds good. Let's go back to some legal issues. What ordinances and laws do employers need to keep in mind in planning for a return to the office? Efrat, do you want to start with that?
Sure. Well, there's a number of them, and I'll start with the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And while not getting into every detail of it, we can just say that generally what the act provides is that covered employers, which means those with fewer than 500 employees, have to provide employees sick leave when they're unable to work because of quarantine or diagnosis or family care obligations. And the Act also provides for expanded family leave for that reason as well. Just this week, a New York federal judge said that the DOL rule clarifying some parts of the Act went too far with respect to its definition of healthcare providers, which are excluded in some instances, and intermittent leave restrictions. It's not clear at this point whether that order actually goes outside of New York or not, but there is a lot of talk about us going back to the time in the very beginning before we had this DOL rule, where there was a lot of ambiguity about how this act is going to apply in certain situations. A couple of other things just to keep in mind about this act: smaller businesses, which are those with fewer than 50 employees, may qualify for exemption from the family leave if the leave requirements would jeopardize the viability of the business as a going concern. The act also sunsets on December 31st of this year, so we're not sure at this point what's going to happen after that date. And while we can't go through every line in guidance, the DOL has issued extensive guidance on this, and there are FAQs and questions on the DOL's website that are very useful, and I would really encourage to go through. Another thing I want to mention is that at the state and local level, several jurisdictions have mandated paid leave for hardships related to COVID-19, as quarantine, medical treatment, or childcare. And so it's very important to stay up to date on the jurisdictions where you have people. Here in Chicago, of course, we have Chicago's paid sick leave ordinance, which, while it predated COVID-19, is not specific to the pandemic, does provide that any employee working at least 80 hours for a Chicago employer within a 120-day period is eligible for paid sick leave. Also keep in mind the discrimination statutes, those that long predate COVID-19, still protect employees during these times as well. There's the Americans with Disabilities Act, which not only prohibits discrimination, but also requires affirmatively that employers make accommodations in certain situations. And I think we'll get more into detail on that later, but there are also protections for age, for familial status. And with those, what I really want to highlight is that, employers shouldn't make assumptions about employees' ability or desire to return to the workplace based on protected status, such as age or family obligations, etc. The final group that I wanted to just highlight is wage and hour obligations. We are likely to see claims centering on changes in job duties and job descriptions due to pandemic work, including situations like when employees pick up duties of other jobs that no longer exist, whether because of layoff or furlough or just changes in the environment, and the impact that that can have on an employee's status as exempt from the overtime laws. Employers also need to be aware during remote work times for the potential for off-the-clock work, and need to really manage and train employees on how to accurately and completely, keep track of time during these times. In addition, both the time and the money spent on PPE might need to be paid, reimbursed, depending on the situation. So those are really, the big areas where we have regulations and things that we need to make sure that we are considering and analyzing and getting advice upon as we make our decisions of who, how, and when to bring people back.
Lots to keep in mind. Anything else from Kyle?
Yeah, Harry, and I think that was a great summary by Efrat. I think it is a lot. I mean, it's alphabet soup that gets thrown at people, and I think to sort of simplify it down, because I think you get outside of the employer-employee orders, and now you've got a whole slew of CDC guidance about how to clean your space, and guidance from the Illinois Department of Health about how commercial office buildings should be maintained. So there really is a lot coming at people right now. I mean, we're living in a very government-centric moment, and so I think it's easy to sort of either at this point, well, early on, I think a lot of people just threw up their hands and they said, well, what do we do? And now it's sort of fatigue, I think, setting in. I think that the things that we've been telling people are really you focus on 4 things: finding the order. Once you've found the order, determine what phase you're in. I mean, obviously in Chicago, we're in phase 4. Then figure out, what type of business you are. Where do you fit in that context? And then once you've done that, you're going to determine what do you need to comply. What do you need to do to comply? Is it mandatory compliance? Is it a guideline to that's a suggestion? What is it? And then you're gonna go from there. Once you've established the local framework, you're gonna go and look at the state framework, and often there's conflicts, and you're gonna have to resolve those. So I think those are the 4 key points in terms of trying to take what could be a very daunting analysis and trying to make it simplified for folks.
Thanks, Kyle. So whenever we do return to work, there's going to be emotional challenges, and how can management effectively deal with employees' anxiety over returning to the workplace, and as individuals, how can we prepare ourselves to return, and once we get there, if our coworkers are particularly anxious about it, what can we do to help them? And Becky, I defer to you to start this one, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I would be happy to jump in here. So as we all know, there are so many different emotional challenges as we consider returning to a physical workspace. A lot of people are concerned about their own safety, and they're also concerned about the safety of their family members. We had one question in the chat about people who live with partners or family members who may be immunocompromised. And so I think that's something that at some point we should loop back to and address those concerns as well. But I just want to note that there are so many different concerns that people are holding. Based on the workplace well-being research, an incredibly important component of workplace well-being involves the employee feeling safe. And so I think it's really important for businesses to consider what are they doing? How are they communicating their safety procedures to their employees? And doing this in a way that's based on the science, that's based on the data, and that's also very transparent. So I think making sure that employees feel safe in the workplace is absolutely critical. It may also, as people are living in, and we have people from different cities joining us today, and so we're all living in kind of different COVID contexts right now. But as in some places numbers are high, in some places numbers are low, but growing. In areas where people are about to return to work, it may be also useful for businesses to communicate what's the threshold for returning to a work from home scenario. And in some places, this may be mandated by the local government, but in other places, it may be less clear. And so I think if employees know this is what's going to trigger me returning back to working from home, I think that would be really useful for kind of reducing some anxiety around that. So lots of measures to increase safety at work, to communicate what's going on, to make people feel safe, and transparency. Another thing is that our rates of anxiety and depression are skyrocket right now. They're so high. And so I think it's important to really normalize that people are experiencing a lot of just baseline anxiety right now. And instead of stigmatizing, really kind of putting it out there, talking about it. And I know people from employment law may have some other pieces to add about how do we communicate about mental health and mental health barriers in the workplace. So I will leave that to you all to comment on, but I think we really have to have more candid conversations about our mental health and our well-being and the challenges we're all facing. Finally, I want to note that some companies that I have consulted with are hiring mental health providers to work with groups of employees, kind of on a group consultation level, to discuss what's making you feel anxious, and to kind of really discuss what can the businesses do to make you feel less anxious, along with providing some practical solutions on managing anxiety. And so that's been one solution that I've been seeing some people invest in. And another thing to consider is that there's a lot of mobile technologies, app-based technologies that are useful for reducing stress and anxiety. So for example, Headspace provides mindfulness meditation via an app, and there's evidence that shows that significantly reduces our levels of stress and anxiety. So companies may consider investing in evidence-based mental health apps that reduce stress and anxiety. So those are a few ideas that I have, and these are all more at the level of kind of what can organizations do to help employees feel safe and less anxious about returning to work.
Good stuff, Rebecca. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to comment on that? Okay.
I'll just
Go ahead.
I'll just make a general comment about the mental health issues. So there's a large literature that I'm sure Dr. Silton's well familiar with on social support and health. And as we socially distance, that comes into conflict. The two are at diametric opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of health. This is a conundrum that can be addressed somewhat through communication over video and phone calls and seeing people in backyards socially distanced. But this is going to continue to become a big problem, and it's a big problem in the recovery community as well, where people are not able to attend AA, NA, and other 12-step and related types of programs in person. And I fear we're going to see a bubble, and employers have to be aware of this in substance abuse problems, people relapsing or perhaps developing abuse or addiction problems that they didn't have prior to the pandemic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I would just say, from the employer's perspective, that the way to do this is exactly the way that Becky just suggested, by communicating solutions rather than questions. So, while we have a lot of prohibitions and regulations around what we can ask employees, and you can't ask things that would uncover anxiety or other issues that would be a disability, you certainly can communicate potential solutions to the workforce at large. Should you be dealing with anxiety, here are some ways to help. Or should you need some type of accommodation, come to us. Communicating affirmatively rather than asking questions is the way to do it, to invite the employee to take advantage of resources rather than, asking questions.
Yeah. And speaking of resources and things that are adding to stress to people's lives, the child care question came up at least a few times in the many registrations that came through. Would anybody care to comment on what they're seeing in terms of how employers are helping to deal with that challenge?
I can jump in here to start the conversation. And I'll acknowledge that I've been working from home with 2 young children. They're 5 and 9. So I have been living this life, and it is an extremely challenging situation for workers, particularly women who tend to share a huge burden of childcare, elder care responsibilities. But I also want to acknowledge this is a challenging situation for anybody with dependents. So from the literature that I've been reading, employers can really help by providing as much flexibility as possible. And this is probably benefits many people, not just people with children. So providing the possibility to work from home can save time with commute and juggling other responsibilities on the home front. Being able to work flexible hours. In my position, I'm able to do that. Sometimes I work early in the morning. Sometimes I work late at night. Sometimes I work on weekends by choice. I have a certain amount of hours that I have to accomplish to make my goals for the week, but I can choose when I'm going to put in those hours, and that's huge. And also doing an anonymous survey of employees about what kind of support they would find useful can also provide really meaningful information. I would just say on the individual level, parents just need to acknowledge this is a really stressful situation, and it's important to take stock and really think about, as a parent, what do you need to take care of yourself? For me, I can speak and I can say I need sleep and I need exercise and I need to engage in enjoyable activities. If I don't prioritize those things, everything else starts to crumble for me. And so I think it's really important for everybody to ask, what do you need to support your well-being right now so that you can take care of yourself, take care of others, and reach your work goals? So I think it's really important to have a clear sense of what are your priorities and then have a plan to align your time with your priorities.
It's interesting. Earlier, I mentioned our experience per square foot model. And through that survey with 55,000 different participants, the generations that were struggling the most with our current state, this is a global survey, was the younger generation, the millennials and the Gen Zs. So it was a little bit different than what we had anticipated going in, thinking that those generations are incredibly tech savvy, adaptable, adjustable, kind of used to working 24/7 or being on demand is maybe a better way to say it. But to acknowledge that generation for many of the reasons that Rebecca just highlighted need to be front and center. And then as we personally focused on our own Cushman & Wakefield's return to work, that was also the group that was most anxious to come back. They thrive on socialization, they thrive on community, they thrive on culture. Yes, in some cases they need a better work environment with fewer distractions, but there were many cited reasons why that return to the office was really desired, not necessarily full-time all day, every day, but was definitely desired to help with that renewal and that reset that Rebecca had highlighted.
There were a number of questions about the future, and as we head towards the top of the hour, rounding probably rounding third base here, just about. What does the future of the workplace look like from each of your perspectives? Once as we maybe it's near term and longer term. I mean, are we ever going to get back to what it was, and what's your take on what it will look like?
Well, no surprise, I have an opinion. So work from home now is obviously, again, a little more acceptable. So think about why so many people came to the office historically. It was because you needed to, it was mandated, your supplies, whatever reason. Many companies expected you to be physically there, even if you were doing nothing but heads down work. I think most employers, certainly the better quality employers, will be open-minded to a little more choice, freedom in the hours that you're working, freedom in the locations in which you work. Obviously, that means companies, in order to excel and to do their job well, needs to figure out how to best support their employees wherever they work, however they work, which is sometimes overlooked. But equally as important as you look at the physical space, the office itself, again, you'll probably see a diminishment in some of the traditional heads down, I come to work, I sit in my own cube from morning till night. The office will basically be reimagined. So you're really focused on community, teaming, innovation, collaboration. How do we co-create as a group, and how do we really enhance that culture? So it's oftentimes overlooked, but place can in fact support enable culture, community, and we know for sure people stay at jobs. The primary reason is because they know and like the people that they work with. So I stand by the fact that that's easier to do in a physical environment than the virtual environment that we're in.
Yeah, and I can from the legal and regulatory standpoint, I think it's important to recognize that the ordinances and the orders and the limitations and the guidance that we're getting, it's not going to go away anytime soon. I think our view is the government involvement that we've seen over the last 4 or 5 months and how people run their business will be with us, for the foreseeable future. So as we think about the workplace, I think, we think about the physical space, but I think we also have to continue to focus on the what will continue to be an evolving patchwork of orders and particularly community by community, the start stop, the surge, the drawback, and how communities respond to that. So I think that will play a large role in shaping what the future looks like.
So I think that we're going to see less business travel as a result of this. I think a lot of people have seen the benefits of virtual conferences. I don't think those are going to disappear. There will still be a place for exhibition halls and large meetings. But I think a lot of the work that we do that requires travel doesn't, we've seen it, does it truly require travel? Can we use video conferencing? There are all sorts of benefits for the environment and in terms of economies of not physically traveling from place to place.
Yeah, and I pose this, not as a statement of exactly what will happen, but a question and something that I've been wondering, just from what we've seen and the employers that we're talking to and the advice that people are seeking from us as far as how to return people safely, how to keep employees safe when they're in the workplace, how to equitably and fairly deal with all of these really complex issues. I wonder if we're going to see a return to a more loyal employee base that thinks of their employer really more as a long-term partnership rather than a stepping stone to the next place. As employers really are trying to do this the right way, maybe it will change the employer-employee relationship in some way. Oh, Harry, you're on mute.
There we go. Sorry about that. A quick question about the workplace and controlling. So we're back in the workplace. We've got these. And sometimes you have these impromptu gatherings, and you notice that, that there's no social distancing going on. And you know, how do you react to that? How do you manage those types of situations?
I can jump in to start. I mean, I think you have to ask yourself who controls the space, right? I think if you're a tenant in an office building and it's your space, I think you would view it one way. But if you're talking about a situation where you're in the lobby of your building, it's really the landlord's obligation to patrol and control that. So you probably rather than taking direct action, you'd probably reach out to the landlord and let them know, hey, I think not enough is being done here, But I think the real critical issue, is that it starts with making it easier for folks to comply with these guidelines. I think that signage, floor markers, notices, masks for those who don't have them on hand when they enter space. I think a lot of times, non-compliance, the impromptu gatherings, the not wearing masks is as much about not doing enough to facilitate compliance. And I think there are a lot of tools out there that employers and building owners can utilize in order to sort of encourage those things. Removing furniture from areas where people are likely to gather, just to name a few. So.
Any other thoughts on that? If not, we'll go around the horn here and just ask if each of you would have any final thoughts, or maybe it's something that you wanted to address throughout this and didn't get a chance to, but please take it away. I don't know, Efrat, would you like to start? Put you on the spot.
No, I think that we've covered much of, the importance. I would just say that, on a lot of these issues, as tends to be the case in these webinars, we dipped our toe in. And there is so much guidance out there. Kyle called it the alphabet soup, but from the DOL, the EEOC, there has been so much research and so much thought and analysis done on how to make decisions the right way and bring people back in the right ways, that it's really, important that employers look at all of this with the right type of advice and expertise, and make sure that they're making, careful and thoughtful decisions in these unprecedented times.
Great.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I think it's easy to get fatigue at this point and lose focus on whether it's personally or from a legal perspective in terms of compliance. And I think my encouragement to the group is just stay the course, stay focused on really the obligations that you have. Because I think it's really going to be those who do that will navigate this legally and from a business perspective, I think more successfully than those who don't. Obviously, in certain communities, infections are still rising, so it's just important to stay up to date with what your obligations are and stay focused.
Thanks, Kyle. Who's next?
Yeah, Deborah can go.
All right.
What's interesting is we advise our clients, we really look at two different strategies. One is the COVID response / re-entry strategy, and the other is really that long-term perspective. So we choose to believe, and hopefully we're right, that we don't want to continue to plan for a sick society. That does not mean we don't relax some of our uber aggressive standards that we've had in the past. We certainly have lots of lessons learned that we should preserve and protect as we reintroduce our model. But we do believe that work, innovation, community, health really comes from a social fabric that is definitely better achieved, better supported, better realized within that physical space. So look forward to reimagining some really, really awesome workspaces that really bring all of those key ingredients to success for major organizations, minor organizations, new organizations to really drive success forward.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sounds good. Becky, what do you think?
Yeah, I would add in, and I think this is what I've been saying this whole conversation, but workplace well-being is really important. It's really important for enhancing worker productivity and creativity. And there are also a lot of cost savings involved with a healthy workforce. So we spend so much of our adult waking hours at work, and workplaces can really play a critical role in promoting our society's well-being. I also just want to close by saying that being kind and empathetic can really go a really long way.
Excellent. Dr. Showman, Showham,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, anything else?
Oh, no. Yeah, just that this is not the last pandemic we're going to have. East Asia, they had SARS, which allowed them, that was in 2003, which allowed them to prepare for this pandemic. And, I agree with Deborah, we don't want to design around a sick society, but we also want to be prepared. And I think the companies that are responding best have the agility to do so, to make changes. They're not the battleships that can't turn easily. They're able to implement changes in the workplace, and
Yep.
we want to be prepared for what comes next, whether it's a second or third or fourth wave, or if it's an entirely new threat.
A really new threat. You're exactly right, and I mean, judging from what we're seeing, it seems like companies are learning their lessons, hopefully, and are taking steps to become much more resilient in the future. I want to thank you all for a tremendous job here today, and I appreciate all your input. We've covered a lot of territory, but there's a lot of things we didn't get to. And to try to address that, we'll include some links into the information that we send out after the fact. But for now, I thank you again for everyone for joining us. Thank you to the panelists and my colleague, Colleen Rainey, for helping. And have a great day, and everybody stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.